what I often see is that men will often initiate, it's sort of a jokey manner, that they're trying to lighten the mood, right? They may do something sort of like what they think is flirtatious or funny, and their partner might be like, that's not turning me on, that's not arousing me, that's actually turning me off. And there becomes this like unsaid frustration, like, oh, he always like you've seen these TikToks, women are
Oh
walking
yeah.
up the stairs and like the guy's always like every time she
Doing
walks
the
by,
butt
he's
flap.
hitting her ass. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, I don't think that any man is like trying to objectify his partner, like especially if they're a long-term loving relationship. I think they're just literally trying to lighten the mood. And women are like, ew, that's a turnoff. And this happens so often. So do you have any like tools or techniques that people can use to sort of bridge that unsaid gap?
Yes, so true. I mean, I love a butt slap, said no woman ever. And so it just doesn't do a lot for female partners. Instead of just telling someone you don't like something, follow that up with what you do like. You've got to give people some kind of tangible idea of what it is that would turn you on. So if it's not the butt slap or the boob squeeze, like what is it? Is it just physical touch and letting a cuddle transition into more? Is it them, doing bath time, or let's say getting dinner ready so that you can go take a bath and have the extra time to relax? Is it a sexy text message earlier in the day? Is it a more, overt, would you like to have sex tonight type of question? Is it, setting out some lingerie or like lighting a specific candle to indicate that, you are in the mood tonight without necessarily asking directly? So I think there's a lot of ways to initiate sex. I have to dig up, I did a post on this maybe a year or so ago, but I think we don't often think about, okay, I know I don't like that, but what is it that I do like? Like that's the piece of the conversation that's missing for people. And coming back to the sexual values, like something we have to think about before we can share with our partner.
Yeah, and I think realizing that often either you're the initiator or you're the rejector. And if you're in one of those camps, like being the rejector plays an emotional toll, but initiating and getting rejected also plays a huge emotional toll, which leads to like avoidance of sex altogether, which is not what we're trying to do here.
No, no. And to your point earlier about like when men are rejected and they don't know how to express the effect that that has on them, what a lot of them end up doing is getting pouty and prickly, which just turns their female partners off even more because it's kind of like toddler type behavior. And so, this is where it comes back to, like you were saying, kind of a gentle letdown, like, oh, I love that you want to be with me tonight, but I am just not feeling it. Like, can we just cuddle instead? And like, let's think about what we need to do tomorrow to like prioritize that, make sure you come through with a follow-up.
Yeah, I think it's really this theory, like this thought, as you mentioned earlier, like sex is just about getting off or having bodies together, and it's not about pleasure or intimacy. And I think reframing that and realizing like whoever is initiating, male or female partner, like, yes, the orgasm is great, but that's not the only thing that people are looking for when they have sex.
No, in the research I did looking specifically at flow state and sexual satisfaction, after I got the quantitative data, I called up my research participants with the highest scores and had really long conversations with them about like what made sex so great that they were able to get into a flow state and what is it that they did to get there. And when I would ask them things like, what was the best part of the sexual experience? They didn't say like the orgasm I had, it was more the feeling they had when they were with their partner. And so, yes, the physicality is a component of sex, but beyond that, it's an opportunity for, relationship connection and even self-expression. Coming back to novelty, like when we're talking about what we want to feel during sex, sometimes it's the question shouldn't be like, what do you want to do? But it's like, how do you want to feel? Do you want to relieve some pent up energy in a consensual, kind of playful way? Do you need to feel comforted? I had one couple who I write about in the book had lost her twin sister and she was grieving a lot, but sex with her partner just was really comforting and made her feel safe. And it felt different than it did, at other times in their life when she wasn't going through that. So it's like, what do you want to feel? Do you need to celebrate? Like, what is it that you need? And then using sex as a gateway to tap into that feeling can in and of itself be really fun and exciting.
Yeah. And I think the same thing can be said for people who maybe don't have a partner. Like self-pleasure can be fraught with a lot of shame for whatever reason, but it can also be a great way to learn about your body, be in touch with yourself, learn your sexual values, right? Like, and so that you can actually express them to another partner.
Yes, yes. I mean, a lot of people ask me, like, is this book going to be helpful if I'm single? And like wholeheartedly, the answer is yes, because I spend a whole, section in each chapter talking about how to connect with each of these qualities in yourself. And so I think when you do that, you show up as a more whole and complete person when ultimately you do find yourself in another relationship.
And probably a more sexually confident person, which will be in and of itself more attractive to a partner.
100%. I mean, I think I say it 3 times in the book, like you cannot separate your sexuality from your individuality. Anything that makes you who you are is in some way, at some point, going to show up in the erotic realm. So the more you understand yourself and all the parts of yourself, the more whole you will show up when you're with another person, which is going to make the sex a lot better.
You talk about adaptability in your book. And so I have a lot of patients who struggle with sexual dysfunction, right? Whether it is premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, women with a painful sex or low desire. And so while you're coping with those things, potentially the medical issues of them, how do you tell people to approach sex, right? Because it can be a very stressful experience when you're trying to have sex, something's not working, your partner may respond a certain way, you feel shame or frustration or guilt or whatever, the amalgamation of symptoms that you're going to feel because of the dysfunction that you're undergoing. So how do people adapt to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I am such a stickler for language. First of all, I tried to replace the word dysfunction with like difficulty or disappointment, just because that in and of itself can take some of the sting out. And yes, I mean, what I tell people is, the sex you had in the early years is going to be different through every phase and season and life. And it will be different if a body part doesn't work as you expected it to work, or, your hip starts becoming a bit arthritic and you can't rely on the same positions that you're used to. Couples I spoke to who sustained a strong sexual connection for the long haul didn't let things like that get in the way of finding ways to connect with one another. They were outside the box thinkers. Like men in particular, it's pretty much guaranteed that at some point erections are going to become a bit less reliable. I mean, it's just part of aging, but it's not something they are taught. They certainly don't see it in porn. Same thing for women. As women age and become postmenopausal, orgasms can become more difficult. But again, when I talk to my research participants about what made sex really great for them, they didn't say the strong erection or the orgasm. That was a piece of it. And yes, that's pleasurable, but it's more how they felt. And so I think to navigate those kinds of hurdles, you have to stay connected to the feelings that you want to have and to your commitment to one another and working through some of this stuff as a team. When difficulties arise, it can be very polarizing for couples. And it can kind of become like you against me. And this is why I pretty much only work with couples as opposed to the individual, because I'm like, we're talking about the sex the two of you are trying to share, not like him or her, whatever. Like, it's not about two individuals. It's about you two working through the hurdle that's in front of you right now. So
yeah, I think it's also like realizing that however you respond to that difficulty or dysfunction, like there's a person on the other side of that you love and care about. And so like really giving grace and being thoughtful and like, okay, something happens, that doesn't mean life is over. Like it doesn't mean that like you're never going to have good sex, because sex is not just penis and vagina sex, right? Sex is a number of different things that all have some form of intimacy and pleasure and connection. And so, I tell people just don't freak out. Let the person with the difficulty lead and be supportive for them. And, and then work through it together.
Yeah, I reflect a lot back on Susan David's work on emotional agility. Like a key question she poses is, okay, yes, you're dealing with this thing, but you want to ask yourself, but what else am I? A lot of times we focus so much on what isn't happening that we forget to focus on all the other things that are happening. And people in my research did just that. The thing that wasn't happening kind of fell by the wayside because there was still so much that was happening, and they expanded on that type of thing. I had one couple who described sex as this kind of constant energetic charge that they would dip in and out of, as opposed to this thing that had a beginning, middle, and an end, which is how so many people think about it. So it's about a reframe.
So I'd love to talk about some actionable tips that as a sex therapist you give to people who maybe come to you with issues with orgasm with their partner. What are some things or like sort of techniques or sort of homework that you give these couples to sort of work on?
So self-pleasure, I think, is the name of the game when it comes to orgasmic difficulty. Like I said before, this is kind of an unpopular opinion, but like I discourage too much vibrator use for women who are struggling with orgasms because so much of it is more of an emotional block than it is a physical block. And vibrators are great and can help women, have an orgasm relatively quickly and reliably. The focus, I think, should be more on the emotional component. What I hear a lot of women talk about is being unable to surrender or let go enough to kind of cross that threshold, the emotional threshold that they need to cross in order to have an orgasm, because it's vulnerable, right? They'll talk about kind of getting to the top of the roller coaster and then just feeling this kind of block. That's where safety comes into play. So coming back to flow science, one of the best predictors of flow is something called the control paradox. So what happens is we think of control and surrender as being mutually exclusive. Like either you're in control or you surrender. But the fact is they are dependent on one another. You cannot surrender if you're not also feeling somewhat in control. I love snow skiing. When I am on a black, I can't surrender because I'm like overly controlling of my skis, or if I feel totally out of control, I can't surrender. It's only like when I'm on greens and blues that I feel totally in control, which allows me to surrender and immerse myself in the experience. So for people who have orgasmic issues, women in particular, I'm always assessing control, whether they have issues with control kind of as an individual, or if control is a dynamic that is problematic in their relationship. We see this a lot where couples have kind of insecure relationship attachments or avoidant relationship attachments. So working with the couple to reestablish safety and find trust within the relationship dynamic can go a long way, I think, in helping people kind of feel in control enough to then let go. But orgasm, yes, there's a huge physical component to it, obviously. I mean, women most of the time don't kind of underestimate how much clitoral stimulation they need. As in heterosexual couples, they're kind of overly focused on intercourse, which is not how most women have orgasms. But once you've done all of that education, it's looking at kind of the emotional components that may be blocking the release.
And then what about for men with premature ejaculation?
Yes. So for premature ejaculation, I'm really working with men on identifying when they are approaching that point of no return. So most men will kind of cross a point in their arousal where if they keep going, like an orgasm is going to happen. Getting back in touch again with the body and the sensations that are happening in the body is the first step. Again, stopping viewing pornography when they masturbate, because when we are so kind of inundated with a hardcore external stimulus, we can't really pay attention to our own internal cues. Switching up the way that they masturbate, because a lot of times the way men masturbate is different from what they're experiencing when they're with a partner. And so doing as much as they can to kind of replicate the way they interact with their partner during sex when they're masturbating will help. And then really it's like the stop start technique that is so tried and true. So a lot of guys have this idea that they just need to keep like hammering away and maintain that friction. But eventually, like, on average, men will ejaculate within like 2 to 7 minutes once rapid stimulation begins. And so if they're noticing their arousal is building too fast, slowing down, switching to something else, focusing on partner arousal, which actually is what a lot of female partners want anyway, because there's, this sort of arousal and orgasm gap. It takes women a lot longer to reach orgasm than it does for men. So it's being a collaborative partner, when your arousal is increasing, you're getting close to that point, just stopping, slowing down, doing something else to focus on your partner. And then that in and of itself, with more practice, men can gain plenty of, ejaculatory control. I rarely have a client who can't learn to control orgasm after those sorts of interventions.
Great. And then what about men who have erectile dysfunction that's primarily due to psychogenic causes, meaning they're stressed about getting an erection? That is what's they're ruminating on instead of being in the sexual flow state, let's say.
I write about a couple in the book who was struggling with this specifically. In this case, it was kind of his feeling like he wasn't providing enough to give his wife the lifestyle he thought she wanted, that kind of had taken a toll on his self-esteem. So I'm always looking at like, what's going on? What are you attaching to this erection of yours that is maybe making you feel insecure about it? Or what's going on in your relationship that's causing some insecurity? Getting comfortable with the feeling of a soft penis for both men and women is an important piece of the puzzle. Men can still experience pleasurable sensations from stimulation of a soft penis. Men can even learn to have orgasms without an erection. So I think a lot of men don't realize that an erection isn't necessary for pleasure or even ejaculation. And so when an erection doesn't happen, they just stop completely. I have a whole section in the adaptability chapter about broadening one's sexual script. And a lot of times, couples who find other ways of connecting with one another that aren't dependent on the male erection will find that eventually they feel safe and comfortable enough that erections return and it's no big deal. So with all of these questions, Rena, it kind of depends what's going on below the surface that's contributing to the problem. There's not like a one size fits all intervention. In most cases, I'm kind of like a detective. When people come in with a sexual issue, I want to know what's going on individually or in the relationship or in the environment that may be contributing to this problem. And then that's what we focus on.
If you enjoyed this clip from the Rena Malik MD podcast with Dr. Emily Jamea, make sure you check out the full video right here.